The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant hum of the city. In the heart of the bustling metropolis, a grand concert hall stood tall, its doors shining under the warm glow of chandeliers. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that comes before a night filled with music that promises to linger in the heart long after the final note has faded. The hall was filled with people dressed in elegant attire, their polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floors, their laughter and chatter forming a gentle hum that mingled with the quiet excitement. Among the crowd was a woman whose presence seemed to contrast sharply with the glittering world around her. She was dressed simply, her attire modest and unassuming. There was no sparkle of jewels, no hint of designer labels, just a plain coat, a scarf wrapped neatly around her neck, and hands that had known hard work and care. Her eyes, however, shone with a quiet intensity, reflecting a deep love for the music she had come to hear. She moved carefully through the crowd, not with the confident stride of someone used to such surroundings, but with a gentle, respectful pace, as though she were entering a world that was beautiful yet foreign to her. The concert hall was magnificent, a temple dedicated to music and its power. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings and the stage gleamed under the soft light, the grand piano at its center waiting silently. Musicians moved behind the scenes, making final adjustments, tuning instruments, and exchanging quick words that were lost to most of the audience, but filled the backstage with a sense of controlled energy. The woman found a seat near the back, not by choice but because it was all that remained. She settled in, smoothing her coat, and took a deep breath, feeling her heart beat with anticipation and a hint of nervousness. The moment the lights dimmed, the murmurs of the audience faded into a respectful silence. The famous pianist, known far and wide for his extraordinary talent and sharp personality, appeared on stage. He was tall, with an air of authority that seemed to command the room even before he touched the keys. His eyes scanned the audience, and for a brief instant, they rested on the woman who had quietly taken her seat at the back. A slight, almost imperceptible smirk crossed his face, a small gesture that carried a subtle sense of judgment. In the world he inhabited, where talent and refinement were celebrated, the sight of someone so plainly dressed and seemingly ordinary must have seemed unusual. The pianist sat at the grand piano, his fingers hovering above the keys, ready to bring them to life. The audience leaned forward collectively, the air thick with expectation. As he began to play, the music filled the hall, sweeping through every corner, touching each listener in different ways. The notes were precise, the rhythm impeccable, and the sound resonated with technical brilliance. People whispered among themselves, marveling at the skill before them, the ability to control and command the instrument with such mastery. Yet amidst all the admiration and awe, the woman listened in a different way. She was not analyzing technique or comparing skill. She was feeling the music, letting it flow through her heart, connecting with memories and emotions that the sound seemed to awaken. Every note struck a chord within her, and she closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the melody. During a brief intermission, the pianist stepped forward to address the audience. His voice, rich and confident, carried across the hall. He spoke of the music, of the pieces he would perform, and of the dedication it took to reach the heights of his profession. As he scanned the audience, his eyes again landed on the woman. This time he allowed a small audible comment, just enough for those nearby to hear. A quiet laugh followed, and the words, though subtle, carried a tone of mockery. He spoke of the audience's appearance, of the contrast between his polished world and the plain simplicity of some who had come to listen. The woman seated calmly felt the weight of his gaze and the sting of the words. A few heads turned to look at her, curiosity and surprise in their expressions, but she did not move or respond outwardly. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, her fingers intertwined, and her eyes remained gentle, though focused. There was a pause in the murmurs of the crowd, a subtle shift in the energy of the room. The pianist, confident in his standing and accustomed to the reactions of his audience, expected laughter, perhaps a ripple of amusement at his comment. But what he did not anticipate was the quiet strength of the woman's presence. She did not shrink, she did not protest, and she did not lower her gaze. Instead, she smiled softly, a smile that held no malice, no bitterness, only calm and a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from within. Some in the audience noticed, sensing that this simple gesture carried a power that words could not capture. It was as if she was silently declaring that she belonged to this moment just as much as anyone else. that her love for the music was as valid and profound as the admiration of the wealthiest or most elite in the room. As the intermission ended, the woman felt a mix of nervous excitement and calm resolve. She had come for the music, for the connection that sound and melody could bring to the soul. She knew nothing of social expectations or judgments, only of the truth she felt when music touched her heart. Around her, the audience resumed their seats, chattering softly, exchanging impressions of the first part of the performance. The pianist returned to his place at the piano, his fingers poised above the keys once more. There was a sense of anticipation, the room holding its collective breath for the continuation of the performance. The woman's mind wandered as she listened to the first few notes of the next piece. She thought of the music she had learned on her own, the simple tunes she had hummed quietly at home, the small compositions she had created with whatever means she had available. She realized that music was not just about perfection or public acclaim. It was about expression, about reaching something deep inside and touching the hearts of others. Her connection to music had always been personal, intimate, a secret joy that nourished her spirit. Yet here, in this grand hall surrounded by strangers and splendor, she felt a sense of universality, a reminder that the power of music could transcend appearances, social class, and even mockery. Meanwhile, the pianist played with skill and precision, his fingers moving deftly over the keys. Yet, for the first time that evening, a flicker of curiosity crossed his face. He noticed her seated calmly at the back, her eyes reflecting the music, her demeanor untouched by his earlier comment. There was something different in the way she listened, something genuine and unaffected. It was not the admiration of a fan seeking validation. It was the pure experience of feeling each note, letting it resonate within her in a way that was untouched by expectation or ego. The realization was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it planted a seed of intrigue in the pianist's mind. As the first part of the evening drew to a close, the audience applauded politely, many rising to their feet. The woman joined in, clapping quietly, her smile gentle, her heart full. She felt no need for recognition or praise. Her joy was in the music itself, in the connection it had forged between her and the sound that filled the room. The pianist acknowledged the applause, his eyes briefly meeting hers again. There was no malice now, only a hint of curiosity, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps there was more to this simple woman than he had assumed. She left the hall that night with a sense of fulfillment and wonder, her mind replaying the music and the emotions it had stirred. Though she had entered a world that seemed distant and intimidating, she had found her place within it, not by conforming to expectations, but by remaining true to herself and her love for music. The evening had begun with mockery and doubt, but it ended with a quiet, unspoken understanding, a promise that the story was far from over and that the next chapter might bring revelations neither she nor the pianist could yet imagine. The next evening arrived, bringing with it a fresh wave of anticipation and a sense of expectation that seemed to hang in the air like a delicate mist. The concert hall once again was alive with the soft hum of conversation, the rustle of elegant fabrics, and the occasional clink of glasses as guests found their seats. The grandeur of the venue made it feel like a world apart, a place where ordinary life could be left behind, replaced by the brilliance of music and the promise of an unforgettable performance. Among the attendees, the woman returned, her steps measured but confident. Though she had no formal training or social standing, she had an unshakable love for music that drew her to the concert hall once more. She wore simple clothes, nothing that would stand out in a crowd of sophistication, yet there was an unmistakable aura of calm and quiet assurance about her. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, not just for the music but for the reactions and attitudes of those around her. She remembered the pianist's subtle mockery from the previous evening, a sting that had been softened by her inner strength and resolve. Tonight she was ready to witness more of the art she adored, prepared for whatever surprises might unfold. The pianist took his place on the stage once again, the grand piano gleaming under the stage lights. His fingers hovered above the keys, poised and ready to begin. The audience leaned forward, a collective sense of excitement flowing through the rows of seats. As the first notes filled the hall, the music seemed to breathe, rising and falling with an elegance that commanded attention. There was a meticulous precision in his playing, each note perfectly measured, each chord executed with skill that left the audience in awe. Yet as the pianist glanced around the hall, his eyes landed on the woman once more. There was a hint of a smirk, a fleeting gesture that suggested he had not forgotten her presence, nor the subtle tension of the previous evening. As the music continued, the pianist allowed himself a brief pause in his performance, standing and addressing the audience with a voice both confident and laced with humor. He spoke about the beauty of music, the dedication it required, and the countless hours of practice that went into mastering the instrument. His words carried a tone of superiority, a subtle reminder of his status and experience. Then, with a quick glance at the woman, he made a remark, playful to some but edged with mockery to those who listened closely. The words, almost casual in their delivery, suggested surprise at seeing someone so plain and ordinary among the audience. A few people nearby laughed softly, unsure whether it was meant in jest or seriousness. The woman felt a brief flush of surprise, yet she did not falter. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture calm, her expression gentle. There was no hint of anger, no sign of defensiveness. Instead, she allowed herself a soft smile, a quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes without saying a word. She did not need to respond immediately or confront the pianist. Her presence and composure conveyed a message far stronger than any spoken retort could. Some in the audience began to notice, sensing that her demeanor carried an unexpected strength, a subtle but undeniable dignity. In that moment, she seemed to embody a different kind of power, one that came not from status, wealth, or skill, but from authenticity and self-assurance. The pianist resumed his performance, allowing the music to flow once more. Yet something had changed in the atmosphere. The audience, previously caught up in admiration for technical brilliance alone, now found their attention subtly shifting. Some watched the woman as intently as they watched the pianist, curious about the quiet confidence she exuded. Others found themselves listening differently, noticing the nuances and emotions in the music that they might have overlooked before. The interaction, silent as it was, had created a tension that made the evening feel more alive, more real, and more unpredictable. As the pianist continued to play, the woman's thoughts wandered to her own experiences with music. She remembered the time she had sat at a small worn piano in a modest room, experimenting with sounds, creating melodies from her heart rather than from instruction. She recalled the joy of discovering new harmonies, the satisfaction of expressing emotions through simple notes, and the comfort that music had always brought her in times of solitude or difficulty. Her connection to music had always been personal and profound, something that transcended skill or recognition. It was about feeling, not performing, about communication, not applause. The audience remained enthralled, though their reactions were now tinged with a new layer of awareness. Some had begun to question their own assumptions about talent, status, and appearance. They noticed that the woman, seemingly ordinary and unremarkable in the eyes of society, was listening with a depth that was rare even among connoisseurs. Her engagement was genuine, her emotional response evident, and it created a subtle ripple effect. People began to reflect on what truly mattered in the experience of music. Was it technical perfection, social standing, or the sincerity of feeling? During a pause in the performance, the pianist glanced at the woman once again. This time the smirk was replaced by something more akin to curiosity. Her composure, her quiet engagement, and the gentle way she seemed to absorb the music without pretension or judgment intrigued him. He realized that she was not impressed by status or showmanship. She was attuned to the essence of the music itself. It was a realization that stirred something within him, a recognition that there was more to the world of music than technique and acclaim. The encounter, simple as it seemed, had begun to challenge his perspective in subtle but meaningful ways. As the evening progressed, the performance took on a different character. The pianist played with his usual skill, but the subtle interplay between him and the woman added a layer of emotion that was new, almost palpable. The audience sensed it even if they could not define it. The music seemed to resonate differently, carrying a warmth and depth that transcended the notes themselves. The woman remained attentive, her presence calm yet commanding, a reminder that authenticity and sincerity could hold their own power even in a room filled with grandeur and expectation. After the final piece, the audience erupted into applause, some rising to their feet in admiration. The woman clapped quietly, her smile gentle, her eyes reflecting a mixture of joy and contentment. She had not come for recognition or approval. Her satisfaction lay in the experience itself, in the connection she had felt with the music and the subtle shift in the energy of the room. She had faced mockery, yet her response had been simple, composed, and entirely her own. It was a testament to the strength that comes from remaining true to oneself, even when confronted with judgment or ridicule. The pianist acknowledged the applause, his gaze briefly meeting hers. There was no longer mockery in his eyes, only a spark of genuine curiosity and perhaps a hint of admiration. He had been challenged not by words or confrontation, but by presence, authenticity, and the quiet power of someone who engaged fully with the world around them. The encounter had begun to redefine his understanding of engagement, respect, and the impact of sincerity. As the audience began to leave the hall, the woman stepped out into the cool night air. She walked slowly, savoring the lingering emotions of the evening, the echo of the music and the subtle transformation she had witnessed, not just in herself, but in the space around her. The city streets felt alive with possibility, as if the simple act of listening and being present could ripple outward, touching the lives of others in ways small yet profound. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from recognition or approval, but from the knowledge that she had remained true to herself, allowing the music to guide her, and in doing so, had made an impact that was quietly powerful and entirely real. The night of the third concert arrived with an air of quiet excitement that seemed different from the previous evenings. The woman walked through the grand doors of the hall, feeling the familiar mix of nervousness and anticipation. She had attended the prior performances, and each had left a mark on her heart, her understanding of music, and her awareness of the world around her. Tonight, however, she sensed something unusual in the atmosphere, a feeling that the evening would unfold differently. The hall was magnificent, bathed in the soft glow of chandeliers and alive with the murmur of a well-dressed audience. The pianist was already on stage, his presence commanding attention. His fingers hovered above the piano keys, poised for the opening notes. As he began to play, the music filled the space, resonating with clarity and skill. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the technical brilliance before them. Yet for the woman, the music evoked emotions rather than judgment. Each note touched her in ways that words could not describe, and she closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to be carried away. During the opening pieces, the pianist allowed his eyes to wander across the audience and, as always, they landed on the woman. There was a flicker of something in his expression, surprise, curiosity, and perhaps the faintest trace of recognition. He seemed to remember her presence from previous nights, the quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the laughter and chatter of the elite crowd. It was as if her calm had left an impression that he could not shake. He played with a skill that could awe any audience. Yet something in his demeanor suggested that he was subtly watching, wondering how she would respond to the music this time. The woman felt the subtle glance of the pianist but did not react outwardly. She was absorbed in the music, her hands folded in her lap, her mind following each note and harmony. Her attention was not on the technical prowess alone, but on the emotion behind the sound. She thought of the small melodies she had hummed in her room at home, the simple tunes she had created when no one was watching, and the joy she had felt in composing music from the heart, rather than from instruction. Music to her was not about impressing others, it was about feeling, expressing, and connecting. Midway through the performance, the pianist paused and addressed the audience. He spoke with the confidence and authority of a master, explaining the inspiration behind the next piece and the complexity of its composition. Then, with a subtle shift in his tone, he made a comment aimed toward the audience that carried a hint of mockery. He seemed to single out the woman, making a joke about how someone so plainly dressed could appreciate the depth of the music he performed. The laughter from nearby audience members was quiet but noticeable, a mix of amusement and curiosity. The woman felt a small twinge of surprise, but it was fleeting. She did not flinch, argue, or respond verbally. Instead, she remained calm, her expression serene and her eyes reflecting a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the pianist's teasing. Her reaction was subtle but powerful, conveying a message without words. She was present, she belonged, and she would not be diminished by mockery. The audience began to notice the contrast, sensing that her calmness and dignity carried a weight that went beyond appearances or social status. As the pianist resumed playing, the music took on a new dimension. There was a heightened energy in the room, a subtle tension that made the performance feel more alive. The audience's attention was divided, not only on the skill of the pianist but also on the woman who seemed to be unaffected by his subtle challenge. Her presence added a layer of depth to the evening, reminding everyone that music was more than technique. It was about feeling, understanding, and authenticity. The woman's mind wandered as she listened. She remembered moments of quiet creativity at home, where music was a refuge from the pressures and judgments of the world. She thought about how she had learned to listen deeply, not for approval or praise but for connection. Each note resonated with her in ways that were personal and profound. She realized that the true power of music was not in applause or recognition, but in the way it could touch hearts, convey emotions, and bring people together across divides. As the performance continued, the pianist's glances toward the woman became more frequent, more attentive. He began to notice something he had not anticipated: her quiet engagement with the music, the subtle expressions of emotion on her face, and the calm confidence she maintained, despite his earlier mockery. It was a revelation to him that someone could appreciate music so deeply, without any formal training, without concern for status, and without seeking validation. Her response was pure, unfiltered, and genuine. The audience, too, began to feel the shift. Some whispered to each other, noting the woman's presence and the way she seemed to absorb the music with an intensity that was rare. Others reflected inwardly, realizing that their own judgments about appearances and talent might be superficial. The evening, which had started like any other concert, had evolved into a subtle exploration of authenticity, perception, and emotional resonance. The interplay between the pianist's skill and the woman's sincere engagement created a dynamic that was unspoken yet profoundly felt. The pianist played on, but there was a noticeable change in his approach. The music, while technically flawless, carried a hint of introspection and subtle emotion that had not been as evident before. It was as if her presence was guiding him, challenging him to connect with something deeper than mere technique. He could feel the weight of authenticity in the room, and though he did not understand it fully, he recognized its impact. The woman had reminded him without words that music was not just about mastery but also about heart, soul, and the courage to feel. As the final piece of the evening approached, the woman felt a surge of emotion. The music seemed to reach into the deepest parts of her being, stirring memories, hopes, and dreams she had long kept private. She thought of all the quiet moments she had spent with music, the solace it had offered during difficult times, and the joy it had brought in moments of solitude. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to witness such mastery, even as she remained true to her own experience of music. When the final note resonated through the hall, the audience erupted into applause. Some rose to their feet, some clapped softly, and others remained seated, lost in the lingering emotions of the performance. The woman joined in, her smile gentle, her eyes reflecting a sense of fulfillment. She had faced subtle mockery and judgment, yet her response had been simple, composed, and authentic. She had not needed to argue or defend herself. Her presence and genuine engagement had spoken for her. The pianist acknowledged the applause, his gaze briefly meeting hers. There was no trace of mockery now, only curiosity, respect, and a spark of admiration. He realized that the encounter was changing him, opening his eyes to the power of authenticity and the quiet strength of those who engage deeply with life and art. The evening had become more than a performance. It had become a moment of mutual recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that talent, passion, and sincerity could take many forms. As the audience began to leave, the woman stepped into the cool night air. The streets were calm, and the city lights reflected her quiet thoughts. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from recognition but from the knowledge that she had remained true to herself. She had listened, absorbed, and connected, allowing the music to guide her, and in doing so she had created an invisible bridge of understanding and respect that touched even the heart of the famous pianist. The night was quiet, but within it there was a powerful sense of accomplishment, a recognition that courage and authenticity could resonate far more than mockery or judgment ever could. The fourth evening at the Grand Concert Hall carried a special sense of anticipation. The woman walked through the familiar doors with her heart beating faster than usual, a mix of excitement and curiosity guiding her steps. She had attended the previous concerts and had witnessed both the brilliance of the pianist and the subtle tension that existed between them. Tonight felt different, as if the universe itself had set the stage for something extraordinary to unfold. The hall was resplendent under the soft glow of chandeliers. Guests were dressed in elegant attire, chatting softly, their voices forming a gentle hum that contrasted with the silence of expectation that always followed. The woman, dressed simply as ever, moved through the crowd, her steps unhurried, her mind focused on the music she was about to experience. Though she was plain and ordinary in appearance, there was a quiet strength about her, an inner calm that drew her through the sea of opulence. The pianist took his place on the grand stage, fingers poised above the keys. The moment his hands touched the piano, the music poured out, filling every corner of the hall. The audience listened in rapt attention, captivated by the technical perfection and intensity of each note. Yet for the woman, the experience was far more than technical skill. It was an emotional journey. Each note carried a story, a feeling, a connection that spoke directly to her heart. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound envelop her, and felt herself transported beyond the confines of the hall, into a world of pure emotion and imagination. Halfway through the performance, the pianist paused and addressed the audience, his voice confident and commanding. He spoke of the challenges of mastering music, of the dedication and countless hours required to achieve excellence. Then, with a subtle shift in tone, he directed a teasing comment toward the audience, hinting at surprise that someone so plainly dressed could appreciate such depth of music. Some audience members chuckled, uncertain if it was playful or derisive, while others glanced at the woman, curious to see her reaction. The woman felt a small prick of discomfort, but quickly replaced it with calm determination. She did not react with anger or embarrassment. Her posture remained poised, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She offered a soft smile, one that carried no resentment or confrontation, only quiet dignity and a sense of self-assurance. Her composure and gentle confidence were magnetic, subtly shifting the energy in the room. People began to notice that her quiet presence held more weight than the mocking words of the pianist. Her strength was silent, but undeniable, commanding attention in a way that words never could. As the pianist resumed playing, the music seemed to take on a new quality. There was a heightened emotional depth, a sense of sensitivity that had not been as apparent in earlier performances. The pianist's glances toward the woman became more frequent, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest his awareness of her presence and response. He began to play with a slightly different intention, as if acknowledging her quiet power and the sincerity with which she engaged with his music. The audience, too, seemed to feel the shift, the subtle interplay between performance and reception, creating a tension that was both thrilling and emotionally resonant. The woman's thoughts drifted to her own experiences with music. She remembered the countless hours spent experimenting with melodies, learning through trial and error, and creating simple tunes that brought her joy and comfort. Music had always been her refuge, a way to connect with emotions too deep for words. She had never sought recognition or approval. Her relationship with music was personal, intimate, and authentic. Yet, here in this grand hall, she realized the universality of music, the way it could bridge divides and touch souls regardless of status, appearance, or experience. The pianist's playing grew more expressive, more nuanced. He began to explore dynamics and textures in ways that seemed inspired, as if he were reacting to an unseen influence in the audience. His focus on precision remained, but there was a new element, an emotional responsiveness that hinted at reflection and introspection. The woman noticed it immediately, sensing that her own presence and genuine engagement were influencing him, even subtly. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from vanity, but from the realization that authenticity and sincerity could indeed create an impact. Even in a room filled with elite and accomplished individuals, audience members began to whisper softly among themselves. Many were captivated not only by the pianist's technical skill, but also by the interaction they could sense between the performer and the woman in the audience. There was an invisible dialogue unfolding, a communication that transcended words. Some realized that the woman's reaction to the music, her calm, attentive, and heartfelt engagement, was a rare form of insight, a purity of experience that few could claim. Her presence was transforming the performance, infusing it with a subtle but powerful resonance that everyone in the room could feel, even if they could not articulate it. As the concert progressed, the woman's mind wandered through memories of her own creative journey. She remembered the small piano in her home, worn and imperfect, where she had spent countless hours experimenting with melodies. She recalled the joy of discovering new harmonies, the satisfaction of expressing feelings through music, and the comfort of having a personal space where emotions could be freely explored. Music had been a companion through solitude, a teacher through trials, and a source of joy through moments of reflection. Tonight, she realized, she was sharing that intimacy with an entire hall of strangers, albeit silently, by simply being present and fully engaged. The pianist, meanwhile, found his performance taking on an unexpected direction. Each phrase, each delicate touch of a key, seemed to carry more meaning. He began to play with a sense of responsiveness, almost as if he were conversing with the woman through the music itself. It was not an intentional dialogue in the traditional sense, but a subtle acknowledgement of the shared emotional space they occupied. For the first time, he realized that mastery of technique alone did not define the impact of music. The authenticity of the listener's experience mattered just as much, perhaps even more. The atmosphere in the hall shifted. The audience, previously focused solely on technical brilliance, began to absorb the deeper layers of emotion unfolding in the performance. They sensed the unspoken exchange between the pianist and the woman, and found themselves reflecting on their own perceptions of talent, judgment, and authenticity. The evening had become more than a concert. It was an exploration of human connection, empathy, and the power of genuine engagement. The subtle dynamics between performer and audience had created a richness that no sheet of music could capture alone. As the final notes of the evening approached, the woman felt a deep sense of connection and fulfillment. The music had carried her through a landscape of emotions, touching memories, hopes, and dreams she had long held private. She felt gratitude for the opportunity to witness such artistry, and for the chance to remain authentic in her own engagement. She had faced subtle mockery and social expectation, yet her response had been simple and powerful. She had remained present, attentive, and sincere. The impact of authenticity was evident, and it resonated quietly but profoundly throughout the hall. When the final chord resonated, applause erupted across the room. The pianist stood and bowed, his eyes briefly meeting the woman's. There was no trace of mockery in his expression, only curiosity, respect, and a hint of admiration. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that music's true power lay not solely in technical skill but in the connection it fostered between hearts and minds. The woman's calm, authentic presence had opened his eyes to a perspective he had not fully appreciated, and he recognized that this encounter was changing him in ways subtle, yet meaningful. The audience began to leave, their conversations filled with excitement and reflection. The woman stepped into the quiet night air, feeling the lingering emotions of the evening wash over her. She walked slowly, savoring the music, the emotions it had stirred, and the subtle transformation that had occurred both within her and in the space around her. The night carried a sense of fulfillment, not from recognition or approval, but from the knowledge that sincerity, presence, and authenticity could create an invisible but powerful impact. In her simple, composed way, she had touched lives and reminded everyone that the essence of music, and perhaps of life itself, was not in grandeur or judgment, but in the depth of feeling and the courage to remain true to oneself. The fifth evening arrived, and the anticipation was tangible in the air. The woman entered the concert hall, her heart filled with both excitement and a quiet determination. Each previous evening had left its mark on her, deepening her connection with the music and subtly influencing the pianist as well. Tonight, she felt a sense that the evening would bring something more, a shift that neither she nor the pianist could fully anticipate. The hall shimmered under the soft glow of the chandeliers, the polished wooden floors reflecting the light like a gentle mirror. Guests moved gracefully to their seats, murmuring softly in appreciation of the grandeur around them. The woman walked slowly, absorbing the familiar sights and sounds. She felt the weight of anticipation in the room, not just for the music itself but for the unseen exchanges that seemed to ripple through the audience. She had no need for grandeur or attention. Her purpose was to immerse herself fully in the music and to remain present, engaged, and authentic. The pianist appeared on the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention. His fingers hovered over the keys, and as he began to play, the hall filled with sound. The music was flawless in technique, yet tonight there was a subtle change in the emotion he conveyed. There was a depth and sensitivity that seemed to reach beyond mere mastery, as if he were exploring the nuances of feeling in ways he had not before. The woman noticed it immediately. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be carried by the music, letting each note touch her heart and awaken memories, hopes, and emotions she had long held within. Partway through the performance, the pianist paused and addressed the audience. His voice was steady, confident, and filled with passion for the art he loved. Then, as if recalling previous evenings, he made a subtle comment aimed toward the audience. His words carried a hint of mockery, a playful challenge, suggesting surprise that someone so plainly dressed could appreciate such intricate and complex music. Some guests laughed quietly, unsure whether to see it as jest or a slight. The woman felt the sting of the words, but it was tempered by her inner strength. She did not flinch, argue, or show embarrassment. Instead, she maintained a serene posture, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her eyes reflecting calm dignity. Her reaction was subtle, but it spoke volumes. There was a quiet power in her composure, a strength that could not be diminished by mockery. The audience began to notice, sensing that her calm presence carried a depth and authenticity far beyond appearances. The pianist, too, seemed affected. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and though he did not fully understand why, he felt a flicker of respect and curiosity. He resumed playing, but the music had changed. There was an undercurrent of sensitivity and introspection that had not been present before, a recognition that the experience of music was as important as its execution. The woman's mind wandered to her personal experiences with music. She remembered the quiet moments spent at a worn piano in her home, exploring melodies with no thought of performance or recognition. Music had always been a companion, a source of comfort, joy, and expression. She had created songs that reflected her deepest emotions, often sharing them only with herself. Tonight she realized she was extending that intimacy to the hall without words, simply by engaging fully with the music. She understood that the true power of music lay not in applause or acclaim, but in its ability to connect hearts and evoke genuine emotion. The pianist's performance continued, but his focus had shifted subtly. Each phrase carried more nuance, each chord seemed to resonate with greater meaning. There was an unspoken awareness between him and the woman in the audience, a silent acknowledgement that something extraordinary was occurring. He had begun to realize that the impact of music was not solely in technical mastery, but in the authenticity of the listener's engagement. Her presence was influencing him, gently guiding the way he expressed his art. He had never considered that a listener's sincerity could affect the performer, and this revelation filled him with both surprise and admiration. The audience also sensed the transformation. Their attention was no longer solely on technical skill, but on the emotional depth and subtle interplay between performer and listener. Some whispered to each other, noticing the woman's calm, attentive presence and how it seemed to shape the performance. Others reflected on their own assumptions about appearances and talent, realizing that the quiet dignity of one individual could leave a more profound impression than words or status. The hall was alive not just with sound but with a shared experience, a collective recognition of authenticity, emotion, and human connection. As the performance progressed, the woman felt herself drawn into the music in a way that transcended observation. She imagined the stories behind each note, the dedication required to master the instrument, and the vulnerability inherent in sharing art with others. She thought of her own journey, the private melodies she had composed, and the solace music had provided through trials and quiet moments of joy. Tonight she was part of a larger narrative, witnessing not just skill but the emotional resonance of human creativity. The pianist, increasingly aware of the woman's influence, began to play with a new sensitivity. His movements over the keys were deliberate yet expressive, each note chosen with an attention that seemed inspired by her presence. He was discovering a new depth in his own music, prompted not by critique or competition but by the genuine engagement of a listener who understood the essence of his art. The realization was subtle, but profound. Connection, authenticity, and emotion could enhance even the most technically perfect performance. The hall was filled with a palpable energy, an invisible thread linking performer, listener, and audience. People began to see the music differently, appreciating not only skill but also emotional honesty. The woman's quiet, unwavering engagement had become a focal point, showing that true appreciation of art required presence, openness, and sincerity. The pianist, too, felt transformed, realizing that his performance was not complete without the shared understanding of those who listened with heart rather than ego. As the final piece approached, the woman felt a surge of emotion. The music spoke to her in ways that were deeply personal and universally human at the same time. It evoked memories, dreams, and emotions she had long held close. She felt a profound sense of connection, not only to the music but to the invisible dialogue unfolding between herself and the pianist. Her presence had influenced the performance, and the experience reminded her that authenticity, courage, and sincere engagement had a power that transcended appearances and social expectations. The last notes echoed through the hall, leaving a resonant silence that hung in the air for a moment before applause erupted. The audience rose to their feet, some cheering softly, others clapping with heartfelt admiration. The woman joined in, her smile gentle, her eyes reflecting contentment and fulfillment. She had faced subtle mockery and judgment, yet her response had been simple and profound. She remained authentic, engaged, and true to herself. The power of sincerity had left its mark, touching not only the pianist but everyone in the hall. The pianist bowed, acknowledging the audience, and his eyes briefly met the woman's. In that instant, there was no trace of mockery or judgment, only recognition, respect, and a spark of admiration. He had learned something new about the essence of music, about the connection between performer and listener, and about the transformative power of authenticity. The evening had evolved into more than a concert. It had become a shared journey, a lesson in humanity, empathy, and the beauty of sincere engagement. As the audience departed, the woman stepped into the cool night, feeling the lingering warmth of the evening in her heart. She walked slowly, savoring the music, the emotions it had stirred, and the subtle change she had witnessed in the pianist and the audience. The night carried a sense of accomplishment, quiet but powerful, rooted not in recognition or acclaim but in the knowledge that authenticity and presence could influence hearts and minds. Her journey was far from over, but she had proven through simple sincerity and engagement that true impact came from remaining genuine, calm, and attentive. Tonight was a reminder that the essence of life, like the essence of music, lay in connection, courage, and the quiet power of being fully present. The sixth and final evening arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation that was almost tangible. The woman approached the concert hall with a mix of excitement, curiosity, and a subtle calm that had become her signature. Each of the previous evenings had left its mark, not just on her but on the pianist and the audience. Tonight she felt a sense that something remarkable would unfold, a conclusion to a journey that had quietly grown in intensity and emotion over the past nights. The hall was radiant, the chandeliers casting a warm glow across the polished floors and the elaborately decorated walls. Guests moved gracefully to their seats, whispers of conversation filling the air. Yet among the crowd, the woman stood apart in her simplicity. Her attire was modest, her presence quiet, but there was an undeniable strength in the way she carried herself. She did not seek attention, but her calm confidence naturally drew the eyes of those around her, a silent reminder that true presence was not about appearance or status, but about authenticity. The pianist appeared on stage, his figure commanding attention. His fingers hovered above the keys, and as the first notes rang out, the hall was filled with music that was both precise and deeply expressive. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the technical brilliance and the emotion in every note. Yet the woman's focus was different. She was immersed in the music, experiencing it on a deeply personal level, letting it resonate within her heart and stir memories, emotions, and dreams she had long held private. During a pause in the performance, the pianist addressed the audience, speaking of the dedication and passion required to master an instrument. Then, with a subtle shift in tone, he directed a teasing remark toward the audience, hinting at surprise that someone so plainly dressed could appreciate such profound music. A few in the audience chuckled softly, while others glanced at the woman, curious to see her reaction. She felt a brief sting from the words but did not allow it to disturb her. Instead, she maintained her calm posture, hands resting lightly in her lap, and offered a gentle, serene smile. It was a response that needed no words, a demonstration of inner strength and authenticity that resonated more powerfully than any rebuttal could. As the pianist resumed playing, the music seemed to take on a new dimension. There was a subtle depth and sensitivity, a quiet emotional nuance that suggested he was aware of the woman's presence and engagement. His fingers moved deftly across the keys, producing sound that was both technically flawless and emotionally profound. The audience began to sense the shift. They were no longer focused solely on the pianist's skill, but on the interaction between performer and listener. There was an invisible dialogue unfolding, an exchange that transcended words and connected hearts in a way that was palpable yet unspoken. The woman allowed herself to reflect on her own experiences with music. She remembered the quiet hours at a small, worn piano in her home, where she had experimented with melodies that expressed her deepest emotions. Music had always been her refuge, a source of comfort and joy, a way to communicate feelings she could not put into words. Tonight, she realized, her private passion had become part of a larger, shared experience, a connection that bridged social divides and touched the hearts of everyone in the hall. Her presence, simple and authentic, had influenced the evening in a way that was subtle yet profound. The pianist's playing grew more expressive, each note carrying an emotional resonance that seemed inspired by the woman's quiet engagement. For the first time, he recognized that mastery of technique alone did not define the impact of music. The authenticity and sincerity of the listener's experience were equally important. He felt a quiet admiration for her, realizing that she had taught him an unspoken lesson, that the power of music lies not just in performance, but in connection, empathy, and the courage to remain true to oneself. The audience began to notice the transformation as well. Conversations among them slowed, replaced by a collective awareness of the subtle interplay between performer and listener. Many began to reflect on their own perceptions of talent, status, and authenticity. The woman's calm, attentive presence had created a ripple effect, prompting others to reconsider their assumptions and appreciate the emotional depth of the music. The evening had evolved from a mere concert into an exploration of human connection, empathy, and the power of sincerity. As the performance continued, the woman felt herself drawn deeper into the music. Each note resonated with her memories, hopes, and emotions. She thought of the countless hours spent exploring melodies alone, the joy and solace music had brought her, and the quiet courage it had given her in moments of uncertainty. Tonight, she realized her engagement was not passive. By simply being present, she had influenced the pianist and shaped the energy of the hall. Her sincerity had become a force subtle but undeniable, demonstrating the profound impact of authenticity. The pianist, increasingly aware of her influence, began to play with a sensitivity and expressiveness that transcended technical mastery. He responded to the presence of the listener, each phrase infused with nuance and emotion. It was as if the music itself had become a conversation, a shared journey that neither performer nor audience could fully predict. The realization that a listener's sincerity could enhance and shape the performance left him humbled and inspired. He had entered the evening expecting to showcase his skill, but he was leaving with a deeper understanding of the power of human connection. The hall was filled with a palpable energy, an invisible thread linking performer, listener, and audience. People were captivated not only by the pianist's artistry, but also by the subtle emotional dialogue unfolding before them. Some whispered among themselves, noting the woman's calm, engaged presence and the impact it had on the performance. Others reflected inwardly, recognizing that the evening had shown them a truth often overlooked, that authenticity, sincerity, and presence carry a power that can surpass skill, status, and social expectation. As the final piece approached, the woman felt a surge of emotion. The music spoke to her in ways that were deeply personal yet universally human. It evoked memories, dreams, and emotions she had long held private. She realized that her journey had been about more than attending a concert. It had been about presence, courage, and the power of being true to oneself. The evening had become a testament to the quiet strength of authenticity, the ability to influence and touch others without words. without spectacle, but simply by being genuine. The last notes resonated through the hall, leaving a lingering silence before the audience erupted into applause. The pianist bowed, acknowledging the audience, and his eyes met the woman's for a brief moment. There was no trace of mockery or judgment, only recognition, respect, and admiration. He had learned something profound, that music's true power is realized when performer and listener connect through sincerity and emotion. The evening had become a shared journey, a celebration of authenticity and human connection. As the audience began to depart, the woman stepped into the cool night air, feeling the lingering warmth of the evening in her heart. She walked slowly through the streets, savoring the music, the emotions it had stirred, and the transformation she had witnessed. The night carried a sense of fulfillment, quiet yet powerful, rooted in the knowledge that authenticity and presence could create an impact that transcended words, status, and expectation. She had faced mockery, judgment, and social assumptions. Yet her calm, genuine engagement had touched hearts and transformed the experience of others. Her journey was complete, not in recognition or applause, but in the quiet, enduring power of sincerity, courage, and the connection forged through the universal language of music.